Can meditation actually stop and prevent terrorism? The analysis found a 72% drop in terrorism and an average drop of 32% in international conflict during these group meditation assemblies. That's crazy. What is going on, world? In today's video, we're going to discuss meditation, but not meditation on an individual level, but group meditation and the possibilities that many people meditating in a group together and channeling their positive energy and their positive emotions together can actually affect society in a positive way, possibly even reducing international conflict and reducing or preventing and stopping terrorism. Yes, is this possible? Well, today we're going to dive into this scientific study and find out, can meditation actually stop and prevent terrorism? Let's find out.
Hold up. I am the Hungarian experiment.
Now, before we dive into anything else here, I just want to make it clear, I'm not one of these woo-woo, believe in anything that I hear kind of guys. I need to see evidence. I need to see strong scientific studies for me to trust and have faith that what I'm reading here or what I heard from someone else is factual and I can actually believe in it to be true. And especially before I come here on my YouTube channel and share it with the world. So that's why I printed this article up and dove into it. But how did I even find this article in the first place? Well, recently I just finished reading Becoming Supernatural by Dr. Joe Dispenza. If you guys haven't read this book or got this book, I really suggest it because it's fascinating. There's some interesting concepts here in regards to meditation and mindfulness training. But again, the whole book is heavily focused on sharing the current science behind the benefits of meditation on an individual level as well as group meditation. As I mentioned there, I found this book fascinating and it had over 80 different scientific studies referenced that Dr. Joe Dispenza utilized, and he also shared a bunch of science from the workshops that he's actually hosted around the world where they strapped heart rate variability measures and did brain scans on people in these workshops, and they found that channeling people's energy in a positive way, that they can naturally manipulate the heart rate variability and the brain waves of people in those workshops. So with some of the evidence in the studies that he showed and referenced in this book, there's strong support that group meditation and energy channeling can actually positively affect people on an individual level. But what about group society as a whole? Now, I'm very open to new concepts like this, but I was a little skeptical, especially towards the end of the book, when he started referencing some scientific studies to justify that large group meditation can actually reduce and prevent terrorist attacks and international conflict. So again, I decided to print up this article here, as well as 4 or 5 different other articles that I had to dive deeper for myself to just really have faith that what he was saying there was true. Because if you guys are following along my channel right now, I'm really trying to break down and show you guys how I believe that there is some very strong concrete science in the world, and we can listen to that. But there's also a lot of science out there done on very small sample groups and for very short durations, and I would classify those as weak science. Now, it's important that we keep doing that science, that we keep collecting this data, but in general, it's hard to draw serious conclusions from this weak science. And what's happening in the world is they take these meta-analysis, so they collect all these weak studies and put it into one, and then try to say, well, this is actually what it is because we took 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 of these small weak studies, and when we put them together, they're strong studies. Now, I don't believe so, but that's just me. I like to dive really deep and really find out for myself. So is this article here, is this article on preventing terrorism and international conflicts, effects of large assemblies of participants in the Transcendental Meditation and TM City programs actually prevent terrorist attacks in the world? Let's find out. Let's dive deeper into the scientific study together. Now, if you're interested in diving deeper into this scientific study for yourself after we finish up this video here, or maybe you're interested in looking into other scientific research, I really suggest using Sci-Hub. Now, this video is not sponsored by Sci-Hub or anything like that, but I recently discovered it after regularly running into restrictions and barriers behind getting access to scientific studies that I want to personally analyze. Typically, these scientific publishing websites, they want you to sign up for monthly or yearly subscriptions to have access to these studies, or they want you to pay per article. This article, I believe, was actually $40. And with the other 4 or 5 articles that I wanted to get there, I would have been paying well over $100, almost $200 just to read science in the world. And again, I believe this is several years old now. Like, we're going to dive into this, but I think this is ridiculous how this is happening in the world. And this is why I love Sci-Hub. They're trying to change all of this and give the world open access to scientific studies, which is the way it should be. So if you ever find that you were restricted from accessing a scientific article there, go to Sci-Hub, put the URL in their little link there, and it should give you easy open access to it. And that's the way science should be for the world. So again, this video is not sponsored, but I'm going to say that this video, and as well as upcoming future videos, is going to unofficially be sponsored by Sci-Hub, because I love what they're doing, and it's the first pirate website in the world to provide mass and public access to tens of millions of research papers. So let's dive into this one and see, can group meditation actually prevent and stop terrorist attacks in the world? So starting right at the abstract here, we see that this study tested the hypothesis that group practice of transcendental meditation, or TM, and TM city programs by approximately the square root of 1% of the world's population globally reduces terrorism and international conflict. For 3 periods during 1983 to 1985, so as I mentioned there, this article is a little old, and I heavily question science that is decades old. I think we need to heavily question how those scientific studies were conducted and everything, and that's why I think it's important to dive into this, not just to trust what Dr. Joe Dispenza said in this book. Now, we're going to find out if what he said in this book is legitimate from the research, but what I find is a lot of people out there, they utilize research, or they use just the abstract or little parts of the conclusion to prove points in the world, but when you actually dive into it, you can tell that they didn't read through the actual scientific study. But let's keep going here. So, for 3 periods during 1983 to 1985, ranging from 8 to 11 days, practitioners of these programs assembled in one place to practice in a group. Data on the number of casualties and fatalities due to terrorism were obtained from the RAND Corporation and grouped as 5-day aggregates, forming a single time series spanning the 3 assemblies. Data on international conflict were generated from date-blind ratings of news events in the New York Times and London Times to give comparable blocks for time series analysis before, during, and after each of the assemblies. So the analysis found a 72% drop in terrorism and an average drop of 32% in international conflict during these group meditation assemblies. That's crazy. So let's actually dive into this here a little deeper. So a little further on in the abstract, it was predicted that as few as the square root of 1% of the population contacting the unified field of natural law through the transcendental meditation and TM city programs would create a measurable influence of coherence throughout the society. Now, I didn't cover it here, but the pages before that I just kind of skipped over discuss what coherence means and why they believe coherence is even justified in the world. So if you guys don't fully understand that, again, I'd really suggest diving into the scientific study for yourself, or even go look up what coherence is. Or again, in Becoming Supernatural by Dr. Joe Dispenza, he discusses coherence and heart coherence and mind coherence. So guys, I think this is very important. You guys need to be getting this book for sure. But moving on to the methods section of this scientific study, there have been 3 such large assemblies during which the number of participants approached or exceeded the threshold of participants predicted to produce an influence on a global scale. December 27, 1983 to January 6, 1984, about 8,000 participants in Fairfield, Iowa. December 28, 1984 to January 6, 1985, so basically the year after that, they had over 6,000 participants in The Hague, the Netherlands. And July 9 to July 17, 1985, so not a full year later, but about 6 months later, about 5,500 participants in Washington, D.C. Now, those are big groups of people coming together. So if they can prove and justify some stuff, then that's interesting. That's fascinating. Even if they can't get 100% concrete evidence, if they can show that large groups of people coming together and meditating together and channeling their energy together can actually influence society and influence the world, I think there's some justification there. So let's see if this is true. So let's see if there is any kind of strong evidence here. So each assembly involved the twice daily practice of the Transcendental Meditation and TM City program in large groups. Other periods of the assembly were given to lectures and organizational activities. Moving on to dependent variables of the method. For each of these assemblies, a separate daily time series was constructed from content analysis of one of the major newspapers that gives extensive coverage to international events. The New York Times, which had been widely used as the primary US source for scoring international conflict and civil conflict, or the London Times, which has somewhat broader coverage of European and African events. To meet the requirement of length for time series analysis, each time series covered at least a 2-month period, starting before the assembly began and ending sometime after its conclusion. For each assembly, articles were scored for international conflict using scales derived from Azar's conflict scale category. The dependent variable of international conflict was constructed from negative events only. The score for a given day was the sum of negative events for that day. For a negative event that involved different actions with different degrees of hostility, the most hostile action was scored. Ambiguity about the occurrence of an event or its duration was resolved by checking the Associated Press and the United Press International Archives. Each article was scored by 2 raters, blind to the date of the article. If the difference of the 2 scores between raters was no greater than 1 scale unit, the 2 scores were averaged. If there were large differences between ratings, less than 1% of the cases, raters discussed the article with a third person until a consensus was reached. Inter-rater reliability was R.88 for the Iowa Assembly, and R.97 for the Holland Assembly, and R.98 for the Washington Assembly. The slightly lower level of reliability for the Iowa Assembly probably results from the fact that a different version of the rating scale was used, as described later in the article. The collection of data on international conflict for the 3 assemblies was conducted initially in the context of 3 separate studies. Thus, there was slight variation in the length of time period in the method of selecting articles for scoring and in the scales used. These small differences in methodology should provide a further test of the generalizability or robustness of results. The assessment of conflict was based on 206 articles, 76.5% of a total of 269 articles, the remainder of which were judged to describe positive events. Analysis covered a 63-day period before November 26, 1983 to January 27, 1984, which constituted 31 days before, 11 during, and 21 after the assembly. And that was for the Iowa Assembly. Now for the Holland Assembly, the dates of analysis were from November 30th, 1984 to February 3rd, 1985. So this was comprised 66 days, of which 28 days were before, 10 were during, and 28 were after the intervention. During this period, 318 articles were rated as negative events, which was about 69.6% of a total of 457 articles, with the remainder containing only events judged as positive. And then again for the Washington Assembly, there was 129 days to this series. They did 100 before, 8 during, and 21 after the intervention, covering the period from April 1st to August 7th, 1985. Analysis of international conflict is based on 638 negatively scored articles, and again 68.8% of the total of 927 articles, again of which the remainder were positive results. So as we can see there, I believe they conducted this study in a good way. They didn't only test the time during the assemblies to see if it had any kind of reduction in regards to terrorism or international conflict. They actually tested, like for the last one, for the Washington Assembly, 100 days before, and what was it, 21 days after. For the Holland Assembly, they did 28 days before and 28 days after, and then for the first one, the Iowa Assembly, they did 31 days before and 21 days after. So I believe they're getting a good sample testing here. They're seeing well before and well after as during to see what would happen. And what they're doing is they're just looking through all the news press that's out there in the world that really focuses more, I believe, on negative events, as we can see there that of all the stuff that they analyzed, typically, at least for the Holland Assembly and for the Washington Assembly, about 70% of the articles they analyzed were about negative events, and for the first one, the Iowa, 76% of the articles that they analyzed were negative. I think this just goes to show you what the news tends to report, but in general, again, I think this study, at least so far, there's strength in this. It's valid. They're testing 6,000 people, 5,500 people, 8,000 people, and testing well before as well as well after. So right now, I'd conclude this scientific study as some strong science, but let's keep going because it is from the 1980s. So now, as you can see here, I am skipping over a lot of pages. I did read through a majority of this, and again, if you are interested, I do suggest reading through it because they dive a lot deeper into the method and how the data analysis that they used to get these conclusions. But right now, just so this video doesn't go forever, we're going to dive into the results section. So the results. So in regards to international conflict for the Iowa Assembly, they saw a decline of 36.4% in international conflict during the intervention period. For the Holland Assembly, they saw a decrease of 24.05% from the trend-adjusted non-intervention mean. And the Washington Assembly represents a 34.9, almost a 35% decrease in international conflict during the Assembly. That's crazy. That's significant. Over 20%. If you can justify and show that you can cause a 20% reduction in crime in your city, like, I think that holds some merit to it. So we're going to continue on here. And even before we get into the terrorism part, here at the end they're saying here that there is no evidence from either the New York Times analysis or the COPDAB file that international conflicts decline during the year-end periods of the assemblies in comparison with surrounding dates. In fact, there appears to be an increase during previous years. So what they were concerned about here, and again, if you wanted to read the full section of what I just quoted at the end there, is that they were concerned that, okay, you know, when we're testing between like December and January, these are the holidays, lots of people are being nice anyways, or probably reducing international conflict. But what they did is they actually went back 5 years. So again, they were concerned that, okay, we're testing, you know, this test that we're doing is during this time of the year where generally things are on a decrease anyway. So this is why there is this general decrease in these. But when they went back 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years to see if during those times and during that, when they analyzed the news from those years, was there a decrease? No, they didn't find that. So as of right now, they're showing that during these assemblies that they can reduce international conflict. But what about international terrorism? And what they found is that this yields a 72% decrease in terrorism 5 days after the onset of the 3 assemblies. And we can see that the decrease in international terrorism found during the assembly periods in the primary analysis could not have been expected due to a year-end seasonal effect, which we were just discussing previously they were concerned about. So when we move on to the discussion here, we can see, as predicted, a statistically significant effect of the large assemblies was observed on both indicators of global conflict. Content analysis of the world news indicated decreases in international conflict associated with the 3 assemblies of 36% decrease, 24% decrease, and 35% decrease respectively, and a decrease of 72% in casualties and injuries due to world terrorism was found after the onset of the assemblies. Guys, that's fascinating. Now, once again, I really suggest you guys dive into this article for yourself, as well as Becoming Supernatural by Dr. Joe Dispenza. But after analyzing the scientific study that Dr. Joe Dispenza utilized in his book here to justify that group meditation could potentially reduce and stop terrorism as well as international conflict, I have to say, this seems like pretty strong science. As we saw there, even though they were collecting incidences in regards to international conflict and terrorism from newspapers, and then compared that to the dates in which they hosted these large group meditation assemblies, I believe they built in the proper redundancies in order to calculate and analyze how much of an effect it had, especially by going back 5 years prior. In general, there are chances for flaws here due to human error or reporting of certain conflicts. Like, again, they're taking it from the news. So if a news reporter didn't report a conflict, then whoop, I guess they would have no way to mark that down. But it appears that there's validity here. It appears that terrorism and international conflict can be affected and even reduced through large group meditation assemblies, which is absolutely fascinating to me. Now, of course, I can't 100% confidently say that it can. Personally, for myself, I would need to see more updated studies, possibly done in the last 5 years or so. And because these studies were done in the 1980s, and I believe technology has greatly improved since this point in regards to data calculation, but I also believe it would be rather hard to conduct a similar study as this due to the advent of social media providing the ability to see all conflicts going on in the world and locally. If I saw studies similar to this one replicated in the last 5 to 10 years, it would give me more confidence to believe in this, but in general, this study appears to be strong science in my opinion. And I will go forward with the understanding and the belief that meditation and group meditation can have the power to affect the world in a positive way due to the concepts that I took away in becoming supernatural and from this study on preventing terrorism and international conflict, the effects of large assemblies of participants in transcendental meditation. So, I want to know what you guys think. Do you agree with this? Do you need more scientific evidence here? Would you say this is strong science or weak science? I want to know, so go leave me a comment in the comment section below, and I gotta say, I really appreciate you for sticking along this far in the video. If you have, and you're not subscribed to me yet, you might as well just go subscribe right now, because I'm going to be doing a lot more analyzing of scientific research and trying to break down the difference between what I believe is strong science and what I believe is weak science. So guys, make sure you go leave me in the comment section below. If you're not subscribed, make sure you go smash that subscribe button, hit the like button, and I'll see you guys in the next video. I am the Hungarian Experiment.